Hi, 大家好. In this video, I'm going to go through 3 top tips for improving your Mandarin pronunciation. First, we need to look at pinyin pronunciation. My first suggestion would be to find a table of pinyin pronunciation sounds that are easily accessible online. Listen and repeat the different initials and finals. Initials are the starting letters. The finals are the finishing letters in a pinyin word, and practice combining them together. So practice saying different combinations of finals and initials, listening and repeating. So you can listen to the accurate sound first and try to mimic that as closely as possible. The good thing about Mandarin is that most sounds in Mandarin exist in the English language. So if you're an English speaker learning Mandarin, there are only a handful of sounds in Mandarin that are trickier for us because they don't exist in English. The sounds that tend to cause problems are C, X, Z, ZH, J, Q, AN, ANG, etc. So I would suggest spending a bit more time focusing on these trickier areas of pinyin when you're practicing to try and get these as accurate as possible from the beginning to avoid bigger problems later on. For accurate pinyin pronunciation, we have to think about where our tongue is in our mouth to help us produce the correct sounds in the right way. To say certain sounds such as ZH, we need our tongue to be lower in our mouth and slightly curved, so that j sound, j, our tongue is lower and curved. However, if you want to produce lighter sounds such as the Q sound, qi, or the J sound, ji, or the X sound, xi, our tongue needs to be pushed up against our teeth, so higher in our mouth and further to the front. There are now many great videos on YouTube that you can find to help you with getting these mouth positions correct and producing the sounds accurately, including in our Beginners 1 course on Trusty Chinese, where we have a video dedicated to breaking down Mandarin pronunciation and another video dedicated to practicing it. To actually practice your pinyin pronunciation properly is to listen and repeat pinyin sounds, so the initials, the finals, focusing on those trickier sounds until you're confident you can copy these accurately and preferably quickly. I would also suggest trying to record yourself. If you record yourself, you can then listen back and compare it with the original audio to judge how accurate you are. You can keep doing this, and if you keep a log, you can actually track your improvement over time. So the more you can listen and repeat, the better you're training your mouth, your tongue, to produce these sounds, especially the ones that don't exist in your native language. Okay, point 2, how to improve your tones. Now this, for me, comes down to 3 different points. The first point is understanding that tones are the pitch of Mandarin characters. So pitch refers to how high or low a sound is, and pitch affects the character's meaning. It's important to understand that tones are relative to each other. So for example, the first tone is high and flat, which doesn't mean it has to be really high. It just has to be higher than the other tones that you're producing. This is really helpful, especially for people with naturally lower voices, men, for example. You don't have to reach really high pitches. You just have to make sure that your first tone, for example, ma, is distinctly higher and flatter than the other tones that you are saying in the same sentence. Next, the best way of practicing tones is by listening and repeating, which is called shadowing. So this technique you can do with any audio content in Mandarin, theoretically, but it's best when you're starting out to start with slower audio. I would also start out with practicing individual words, trying to be accurate with how you're producing the tones individually or in pairs if it's a word with 2 characters. Then you can start to move on to longer phrases and sentences. When shadowing, you don't want to focus too much on which tone you're hearing and trying to produce. For example, Is it the first tone? Is it the second? Is it the third? Is it the fourth? When you're shadowing, what you need to be doing is listening and trying to mimic that sound as closely as possible. So if the pitch is moving up, if it's going down, you just want to be listening and trying to copy that as closely as you can. Because when you're speaking Mandarin with the tones, you shouldn't be actively thinking about the tones. We need to get to a point where you're just saying them without thinking. That's going to help you reach confidence and fluency. However, it's not easy. If you're not used to speaking a language with tones in it, you have to be quite fearless to practice tones, because you are going to make mistakes, and that is fine. But overcoming that barrier can be very tricky. For people who don't use tones in another language they speak, trying to produce tones can feel very unnatural. But the more you practice through listening and mimicking and the shadowing, the more natural it's going to become. And the more naturally you'll be able to produce these tones separately and then together. The last thing you need to know about tones is they sound differently pronounced individually versus together. So this is why it's important to start practicing with individual words to begin with. However, you're going to reach a barrier eventually in your pronunciation if you are only practicing with individual words. Once you gain the confidence and you can produce tones to a high degree of accuracy with them by themselves or in pairs, move on to phrases, move on to sentences. That is going to help you to feel confident speaking properly in Mandarin, accurately with your tones. So make sure you're building up. Again, I would start with slower audio so you can get those chunks of sounds as accurate as you can. But eventually you can feel you are able to move on to faster audio as well. That brings me to point number 3, how to improve your intonation. To improve your intonation and natural expression in Mandarin, you need to listen more and you need to speak more. Listening to things such as podcasts, TV shows, radio, anything with natural Mandarin speech is going to help you to improve your intonation. Intonation helps you sound natural, helps you avoid sounding like a robot. You can do this by practicing with short phrases again or sentences. But for intonation, you want to listen for, okay, how do people express emotion? How do people express happiness, anger, surprise when they're speaking Mandarin? Because that is affected also with the tones. The tones are still there, but the emotions are added on top. And for people who don't already speak a tonal language, that can be really tricky to understand. So when you're practicing shadowing for intonation, listen to how the tones sound together and in different combinations. You will also start to hear that certain words are said a bit more lightly, a bit more quickly when combined in full sentences, speaking at natural speed. So these are the things that shadowing practice can really help you with. I know for myself, I picked up a lot of my intonation from listening to Mandarin TV, but also from the way that my Chinese colleagues speak. I think in addition to the listening, the speaking aspect is really important. The more just listening is not going to do good for your speaking by itself. You need to have a safe outlet for speaking that allows you to make mistakes and not feel fearful of that. So you could do many things to practice. You could practice speaking to yourself around the house in Mandarin. You could keep a verbal diary on your phone, just recording a bit of a Mandarin each day. You could find a language partner. There are many apps where you can find language partners, or find a language corner in your city in person. Or you could book a Mandarin tutor specifically for pronunciation and speaking practice. Okay, that's all for this video. I hope our tips on Mandarin pronunciation help you out. Let me know in the comments if you try anything you really enjoy. If you would like any personal feedback on your Mandarin pronunciation or speaking, check us out at trustychinese.com or find us on WOP. 再见，下次见。